What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Steelers Breakdown Podcast. Nick Farabaugh here with you guys. We are in the depths of the dead period. And so today's going to be a bit of somewhat of a mailbag episode. Really, the next few episodes are going to be I have ideas of what I wanted to talk about, but I also want your guys' questions. I've been gathering them. Continue to please send them down below because they will become the topics for these shows up until training camp comes on July 23rd. So we will try and answer all your questions. I'm going to try and make many of these episodes as multifaceted as I can. And that is exactly what today's episode is going to be. And the most questions I got, believe it or not, when I put it out there, was about Jalen Ramsey. I'm not surprised that it was the number one topic asked about to me. People have really been curious about the Jalen Ramsey stuff. Um, and so, I just have one question. We getting Ramsey. If you think Jalen Ramsey is a realistic shot of being traded to us, what are you hearing about Jalen Ramsey? So I have three Jalen Ramsey questions that I got right off the rip. What would he cost? Where would he play? All these are questions. And so let's address Jalen Ramsey a little bit today. Won't be the only thing we talk about because I'm going to talk about slot corner too because I have a few questions about slot corner. I think these kind of go hand in hand actually. And so we'll talk about slot corner today. Jalen Ramsey's an interesting player in terms of the rumors. Obviously, Jair Alexander's a Baltimore Raven. If you were hoping for the Jair Alexander signing, that's off the board. He took less money to go play with his college teammate in Lamar Jackson, and that has a high upside move. Obviously, a lot of risk as well with the injuries that he has dealt with, but really low risk, high upside move for them because it's just not a lot of money. But let's see about Jalen Ramsey. Ramsey's interesting in a few ways. One, he's obviously higher caliber. I think he's a better player. And more importantly, he fills a need the Steelers have, very obviously being slot cornerback. I think the two biggest needs on this roster right now are pretty obviously wide receiver two and slot corner. Even though I like the corner room more than a lot of people do. I like how Darius Slay played last year. I'm optimistic about Joey Porter Jr. I like Brandon Echols. I like Corey Trice. I like some of these players. That slot corner room is not great. Even if you like Beanie Bishop, I'm not like super enthused by the idea of him playing three downs. I would like someone in there now, maybe a Dante Kenner, or Sebastian Castro, or just someone else off the radar pops in there. But let's look at secure, realistic ideas. If they trade for Jalen Ramsey, he's going to be the slot corner. But is he just going to be the slot corner? Probably not. And here's why. You're not paying 20 plus $1 million for a slot corner. Jalen Ramsey was just extended last September. And so his contract is going to be the big hurdle here to any trade happening. Why has he not been traded yet? It's been because of this. There's void years on that contract. It's basically a 1 year deal because you can get out of it after next year. There's really not a lot holding you to that with a post June 1 cut next year. So you can easily get out of this Jalen Ramsey deal if you traded for him. But the cap hit this year is like 16 million. So the Steelers would have to make some move, whether that would be a extension of TJ Watt. That could help ease that. A restructuring. You could look at guys like Alex Highsmith, Pat Fryermuth, Cam Hayward. All those guys have can be restructured and open up some space. And so you could do that if you're Pittsburgh. Jalen Ramsey is a really good player still. I turned on some tape. I wanted to see. I wanted to make sure before I talked about this that I wasn't talking about a player that, despite the stats, that underneath everything was washed. And I think the more you look at it, he's not. He can still move really well. He's 31, but he moves really well for that age. He's still a ball hawk. He's still physical and willing to put his face in the fan. He's a beer corner. So when you look at Beanie and Kent and Eccles, we're talking about smaller guys. That is not what Jalen Ramsey is. Jalen Ramsey's 30 and will turn 31 in October. But Jalen Ramsey is a big guy. He's like 6'1", and he's probably 190, 195, maybe even more. I think he's listed at 208. He's a bigger type of guy. So this guy, when you put him in the slot, different type of player, has played at that star position before. significant snaps in the slot for this player. And for someone that I've been saying, wow, I want the Steelers to do something about the slot corner position. It feels a little odd for me to tell them not to do that. But I do think getting that older player, the odd contract, because I mean, you could try and restructure it and rework it, but it's a really weird contract to take on when you don't have all the room to do it. I mean, it basically nukes your chances of making a signing like an Amari Cooper in some regards too, or Keenan Allen, despite Keenan Allen's comments. If you keep that on the board, Gabe Davis then becomes obviously the top option because he'll sign for the veteran minimum, but it does hurt your ability to do that. And it's an odd contract. I don't think you trade much for that. You trade a fifth round, sixth round pick. Draft capital is not my worry here. It is more so about how does this line up a timeline and how much does that contract affect what you can do, flexibility wise, to fill the other hole. And so listen, I don't know if this will happen. I've heard that they've called about it. I have not heard necessarily that anything's imminent. Have they had discussions about it? Has there been compensation talked about? I do believe there has been. They're in the market searching for slot corner, just like they are wide receiver too. And I believe the fit would be Jalen Ramsey playing outside and then knocking inside. So, depending on matchup, you could take Joey off the field, you could take Slay off the field, you could take Jalen off the field. It would be depending on who you're facing, what you think stylistically fits best, and you can have a 1-2-3 kind of interesting punch there at corner and just bring them in. And you're playing nickel so much. So, I mean, all three of those guys are basically starters if you did trade for them. It's just a really expensive slot corner to bring in. Ramsey's not taking a pay cut by any means. So it feels a little odd. The timeline on this, I don't know. Um, how realistic do I think it is? The contract to me makes feel less realistic, but there are hurdles here, for any team that's trying to go out and get Jalen Ramsey. That contract's A1 on it. It's just an odd contract to sink into this time of year. Teams just don't have gobs of cap space open this late in the year. If this happened in March, I think it would have been way easier to move the contract. Now, I think it's a little harder if you're a team to take on that deal because it is such a big contract. And so I'm interested to see where this goes, the cost of it. I think the cost is going to end up being around a day three pick, a midday three pick, as long as you get all of that kind of worked out. And listen, if you're talking about going all in, I mean, this is a move to do it, and I would love to see the Steelers with a legit slot corner just to see what that scheme looks like, to see how it would work. I think it would open up a lot of things to have Jalen Ramsey in there, but it's a huge contract, and so we'll see. I do think the Steelers have at least talked about it internally. They have a plan if they did acquire him. I think that showcases something. It's just where kind of does that fit into the long-term vision, the short-term vision, and how do you fit the contract under? Because it's not an easy contract to fit underneath your cap this time of year. And even for the Steelers, it's not an easy contract to fit under. They have more cap space than most. They have 19 million right now, but you got to set aside like $7 million of that cap space at least, if not more. You have to set aside a good bit of the cap space. And so when you look at the Steelers' cap space situation right now, the Steelers currently have around $18 million in cap space. So 18,812,000 in cap. But you got to set aside, a significant portion of that to make sure you have your practice squad, to kind of just have an emergency fund just in case you need to make a signing in season, a trade in season. You need to have enough cap space to have flexibility during the season. So really, the Steelers don't have that much in flexible cap space. In usable cap space, they have far less than 10 million. And so when you're talking about taking on a contract that is more than double probably their usable cap space, you're talking about kicking the can down on some of these contracts in the future. And that gives you less flexibility on some of those contracts in the future. And so there's always a risk and a reward to restructuring. Could the Steelers do it? I think they could fit under it if they wanted to. I'm just not sure how this contract's going to kind of work out for the future. Um, and overall, where this thing fits. I see the Ramsey fit being way more seamless in terms of on field, though, than what I saw off on. Jair's tape. Jair's an outside corner that hadn't played slot in a long time. He's an often injured player. You are not um you are not going to put a often injured player in the slots, a more physical position than outside. Jair's played 14 games in the last 2 years. Ramsey fits that. He's a bigger player. He's more physical. You can do more blitzes. You can do some interesting things. So I'm not going to roll this out as not happening. There's some definite obstacles here, and I'm a little skeptical on the timeline part of it, and if this is just a 1 year patch overall because the contract's just such an absolute albatross beyond this year. If you keep it, so you would have to restructure it and consistently rework it. Now they could do that if they wanted to, but something to think about. But I'm not against it because I don't think this is going to cost more than a midday three pick. I think that I've heard some people that say, well, this will cost a third round pick. I don't think it's going to cost a third round pick. I think it's going to cost a fifth or a sixth with this big contract. If the Steelers can find a way to fit it under, I mean, I'm for it. Even though I like this corner room more than I think most people do, it's Jalen Ramsey. The tape shows he's still a good player. So, like, I'm not throwing it out. And from what I've heard, I don't think it's complete lunacy, fantasy land either. I'm not going to say right here and tell you guys it's happening, but I don't think it's like absolutely crazy to think it will. But let's talk about slot corner in general because I don't think we can kind of bank on the Steelers landing Jalen Ramsey right now and say, oh, they're Jalen Ramsey, he's coming. Um, so let's talk just about slot corner. And this is interesting. What other options outside of Jalen Ramsey are there, both internally or externally? And so this is an interesting question because if we're talking about realistic, I do think it's still probably more realistic the Steelers end up either going with their internal options here or trying to get another external option. And there's probably more external options than you would maybe think on the slot corner options. But let's talk internal options. Obviously, Beanie Bishop top one. We were talking about a guy though that was benched for Cam Sutton. Obviously, Cam Sutton was awful last year. Beanie Bishop showcased some good things, but is he a guy that you want to rely on to start in your slot? He's a smaller corner. His coverage skills aren't elite. We're talking about a guy that works hard and is feisty and has a high character guy. He's a really good ball hawk. He's ball aware. I like the young upside of him, but we're talking about a guy that the Steelers organization and coaching staff clearly did not trust enough to play over Cam Sutton, even when it was obvious Sutton was bad last year. And so that's something to keep an eye on. Um, I don't feel great about it. I would be lying to you if I said, well, I fully believe in Beanie Bishop. Am I like cautiously optimistic that you could have something there in Beanie Bishop? Sure, but the tape last year was a roller coaster ride. He blew some coverages. Can he not do that this year? Can he take on more of a role and become a veteran piece? Sure, he could, but I think it's a big, big question mark for this team. And if he doesn't become that, I think it becomes one of the biggest holes on the team, if not the biggest hole on the team. Slot corner is an issue, and I do wish the Steelers would invest more in it, which is why I'm not going to blow off the Ramsey trade as a dumb idea. And so I would just like to see the team with a really good slot corner. Here's the thing: there's actually a decent amount of slot corners on the free agency market. But I do want to finish the internal options. So Dante Kent was the second team slot corner in minicamp and OTAs. That's their seventh round pick. Played pretty well. We are talking about a guy that is feast or famine. And I mean that in the kind of utmost way possible. We're talking about a guy that allowed the second most explosive receptions from 2022 onwards to the end of his college career. He also led the led the nation in PBUs. He was a forced fumble machine. He's a punt returner. He's a really intriguing piece. I wouldn't be surprised if he makes this roster. I thought he looked good. I thought he looked like he belonged out there on the football field at minicamp. I thought he was one of the big winners of the week, to be quite honest with you. So I like Dante Kent and what he brought to the table. But again, you're relying on a UDFA from last year and a seventh round pick to do that. I don't know. Third in this pecking order is Deshaun Jameson, and he was not great in OTAs or minicamp. But someone to think about it. But we didn't even see Sebastian Castro, Brandon Eccles in there. Could they be options? Sure, but none of those options to me feel great. It's not a ton of investment there, and so hoping you find a gem at slot when it has been an Achilles heel for you isn't great process to me. And so free agent cornerbacks, I mean, there are a few of them out here that I think are fine. And you kind of look at them and you say, "Oh, Well, there's actually some interesting talent here. I think the obvious one is Kendall Fuller. Kendall Fuller was cut, and he is a guy that can play outside or inside, but more so inside. He's 30. He's another older player, but could you plug him in there and get a legitimate, decent slot corner option? I think that's not crazy to think about. You have potentially Mike Hilton on the market. Hilton's still out there. If you like him, he's not a great cover corner anymore. He's an older player. He's smaller, but still, we know what Mike Hilton brings to the table. He's still a feisty fireball in the slot. You have Arthur Mollett, former Steeler again. How about Asante Samuel Jr.? He's an interesting player to me. Asante Samuel Jr. is dealing with an injury right now, which is why he hasn't been signed. Not a great tackler on tape. If you want to play him in the slot, you can. He can play slot or outside. He's more of a pure cover guy. So to me, if you sign him, you're probably putting Beanie in the rundown role because I trust Beanie more to tackle in the open field than Asante Samuel Jr. But I can get down with that if the medicals check out. What I'm trying to say to you guys though is like there's options if you wanted somebody out there as a slot corner. I think that it's not just Jalen Ramsey or bust. And that's kind of what I wanted to say there is this slot corner room falls quickly. I think the Steelers can pivot to a free agent and actually have decent options where it's like, okay, this guy could be something. And this guy has some of the options for the Steelers that could at least fill that void. Like, I don't think we should be talking ourselves into saying, well, Ramsey is 100% going to be happening. And Ramsey is going to be a guy that is just going to show up here, and that's going to be a foregone conclusion. I think that is probably getting ahead of yourself. And while I like the idea of it, I also really would caution you from getting ahead of that. Could it happen? Yes. But is it imminent or anything? I don't think so. And so we'll see where this goes. But slot corner to me, we talk about wide receiver too. I think, slot corner to me is just as big, maybe slightly less of a problem as it is. I would like to see the Steelers with the legitimate slot corner. We've talked about that for years. And so let's see what they can do here. But there are options for them externally here, not just Jalen Ramsey. There are free agents there that I like, guys like Kendall Fuller, that I think could be legitimate options for the Steelers there that are at least solid enough. That can give you a rotation that doesn't overexpose someone in that room that is part of the internal options if you really like those guys. All right, folks, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn the notification bell for more. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll get to some O-line questions because you guys had a lot of questions about Broderick Jones, Troy Faltano, and others. And we will talk about the O-line and just how important it is to the success of the Steelers this season. Folks, make sure to read the stuff over at penlive.com/Steelers. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, everybody.